Woo!
We're now live streaming. Woo!
Yep.
So, but your live stream recording?
And I'm gonna hit record. So I'm just checking to make sure that we're connected, and we are connected in several platforms, but we're checking first as we connect. Hello, my friends. While we get everything set up, we are getting live right now. I have the wonderful pleasure to have a couple of great IT executives that are going to be with me in this session. So first thing that I want you to do, that you're watching this, we're going to be sharing it through the different platforms, is that I want you to share this because we're going to be talking about how IT leaders need to work during a pandemic crisis. And you know that we're going through that, but I want to be able to share that with all of you. So you can also ask questions. So I'm going to be having the questions on the phone, and I'm going to have my two best friends and leaders that I have worked with for a long time, and I trust them. And the whole conversation is going to be on how to really manage IT during this crisis. So I want to present or introduce first. On my left, I have Paul Lewis, Global CTO. Hey, Paul.
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be here.
And I have with me the Dungeons and Dragons Master, or whatever title you want to give. This is the biggest dude in the area, Howard Holton. Hey, Howard.
Hey, Carlos. How are you?
Very good. And you?
Good.
And as I said, my friends, make sure that you share this, and that I'm going to enable all the questions right now, so you guys could ask us any questions while we're on this stream. And Paul and Howard, this crisis is actually something very interesting for IT organizations. Do you think?
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an understatement, right? I think this is the most interesting crisis we've had since the 1920 Spanish flu.
Yeah. So from an IT, the traditional IT role that is help enable an organization to bring their view or their vision into reality with technology, has that changed during this time?
I don't think they have a choice but to change. The reality is a good portion of these organizations are at home, right? They're closed up their shops. They've closed up the plants. They've all of their resources that used to be centrally located is now federated at home. So they have to change the way they're doing business. And a good portion of these businesses are in fact not earning any revenue. So therefore, IT's role has changed dramatically because of it. Now, if we want to sort of break down the conversation, let's kind of break it down in 4 points, because I think we want to double click on each one of these points. So think of a CIO's perspective now in a pandemic as 4 different concerns, right? So concern number 1, how do I manage capability? And by that I mean, how do I do things that usually required more than one person in a room, whether that's create something or solve a problem, right? So that's number 1. Number 2 is, which is less obvious but still important, is resiliency and capacity, right? I'm used to, as a CIO, thinking about capacity in terms of my data center, in terms of availability of those applications to people who work in my office, right? Thirdly is cybersecurity. How do I now have to think of cybersecurity not only as keeping the bad guys out, which of course will get worse in this pandemic, and then figuring out how to do cybersecurity with thousands of people at home. And then finally, which is less obvious in IT, but very important in terms of the projects they do, which is the digital transformation stuff. Of all those digital transformation projects that they're working on, how are they going to be different now that the business is different? So maybe we should tackle it in those 4 parts and see what we come up with.
Okay, so I jotted down so we can go through it. So let's go first there. Managing capability. When you say capabilities, and probably Howard jumping in here, are we talking about the capabilities that IT delivers, or the capabilities on a different way?
I mean, I would say it's broader than it's ever been before, because no longer is IT responsible just for its capabilities, right? But all of a sudden they have to enable the business capabilities to operate in a completely 100% distributed fashion, right? So I think it's broader than it was, and far more complicated. Um, the biggest challenge that I've seen, kind of, I would split into two buckets when it comes to capabilities. The first is the lack of business continuity planning in reality, right? Your business continuity plan is supposed to extend disaster recovery to how do I keep the business running when, at the very least, my facilities are no longer available. Well, the scramble that I've seen shows that we need to kind of go back to the drawing board on BCP.
So go a little bit deeper in that, Howard, because so traditionally organizations do only a disaster recovery testing, if we even call it that, probably once or twice a year.
And it's just DR, right? It's just system failover. In reality, they're supposed to do business continuity planning, and they are supposed to test their business continuity planning, which is effectively, there's some sort of environmental issue that prevents us from occupying a building. How do we handle that, right? Where's the meeting location? How do we deploy phones? How do we continue services lacking facilities to go to? And while this is an extreme version of that, because it's effectively, an asterisk instead of the name of the building, because it's all of them, we still really should have had these things written for every one of our facilities and had been practicing them.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Like BCP, even if you had one, it probably wasn't a all company BCP, right? It was probably a single location BCP, or a single city, or a single state, or a single country. This is worldwide BCP.
Sure, but I still should have BCP for each of those things, not
Sure.
just one. I shouldn't have cherry picked.
You can't anticipate necessarily that this pandemic you needed to be prepared for, right? That
For sure.
100% of your workforce needed to be somewhere else, right?
So sure, this is obviously the absolute worst case BCP.
Right, and it's fair that organizations simply don't have that, and now you have to think about the distinct difference between BCP information worker and BCP task worker. And while you'd think that the task worker was easier, I'd argue that information worker was much more difficult because task workers work by themselves for the most part, where information workers work as a team for most part, right? They're either creating something or they're solving a problem, right? They're collaborating to solve a problem. So if you're used to doing it in a room with a whiteboard in a war room, or you're doing agile Scrum application development, very hard to do that in a highly distributed way.
So
kind of though, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna ask, because isn't it really that different when you have people that have worked across geographical regions that now they had to keep working geographically, or is there something different in now that we had to take into consideration?
I think there were very rare successful agile Scrum teams that didn't sit beside each other in a room delivering on, new code on a daily basis. That's all. Like, sure, technically one could do it just like we're doing it right now. But, in its true sense, they're working side by side, each looking at code, each revising things, each, adding a field where they needed to add a field in order to get some promotable software on a daily basis or a weekly basis. It's just that much harder. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just that much harder. Versus
I would say it is harder in that it increases the complexity, it increases the load, but it's also the easiest group to work with, right? Like, the problem with a task worker is used to going into an environment created by someone else, sitting in an environment created by someone else, working with things that are controlled by someone else. And if they have a problem, they go, hey, I have a problem. And they're the ones that most frequently would have a problem, right? The number of tech support calls you get from software developers about what goes on their laptop is grossly different than the number of tech workers that, plugged in a headset over the weekend, turned on the microphone and knocked it behind the computer, and now are wondering why their computer's acting funny.
Right. That's fair. And I would distinguish the difference between service desk, which is going to encounter those problems, and like a banking contact center, call center, where they're most likely answering the exact same questions all the time. And you should be able to package up that script, not only like they have it now, and work alone like they do the 8 hours now in their home.
Sure.
So you're right. Service desk in IT needs to now be 10 times as big, because now you're asking for them to answer a whole bunch of home-based technical questions to which
Right.
they normally wouldn't have answered.
So before
Yeah,
we
they
continue,
normally wouldn't have cared, right?
friends that you're watching this from all the different platforms, this conversation applies to you and also your friends. So I want you to click the share button that you have on the bottom of your screen. If you're on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, click the share button so you can share on other places. If you're watching this through a link that we posted on LinkedIn, make sure that you share with other people, because the idea is that we can come and we can have this conversation with you and with everybody else. We're monitoring the chat for you guys who can send us questions. And so we were discussing about that change in the BCP, in how the pandemic have changed how we do things. And the conversation was going in the way that different workers have different requirements. And we probably have thought about that, but then how do we as IT leaders, Howard and Paul, can look into making then those workers a little bit more efficient, or helping them to focus during this pandemic so they can continue to probably do what they need to do?
So I would say this is a really good opportunity to be a leader and a really bad opportunity to be a boss, right? The hardest thing about now is it's disruptive for everyone. And kind of to Paul's point, our service desk needs to be 10x what it was before.
Mm-hmm.
That means the focus needs to be a lot less on internal meetings and a lot more on internal customer support, right? Regardless of whether you're tier 1 or you're tier 3 or you're an architect, whatever it happens to be, right? So I would say the number one thing that I would do as a leader is really focus on enabling my people to be as effective in enabling those capabilities of the business as possible, right? So start really focusing on, are these meetings actual meetings, or are these meetings things that can be solved with an email or a Slack chat, as an example?
So leveraging technology for what is supposed to be used.
Absolutely. I would also say let's take advantage of the fact that this is the worst case scenario. If you don't have someone continually doing a live action report, I was going to say an after action report, but really, because this isn't over, a live action report, and constantly sending out lessons learned, you're really probably missing a good bit of the point.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing point. I think if you can consider this worst case scenario and you do this 50% well, you're probably going to do 100% well in a situation that's much more likely to occur, right? Where it's a single data center, or a single office, or a big weather-based event. You should be able to handle that because it's more contained.
So, and as IT leaders, you guys have worked with big organizations and with small organizations. So what is the normal requirement that the leaders receive from the business so they can push down to the people? Because we're talking about managing the capabilities that the IT organization may have. So think about it a little bit from before and from now, what you're seeing. Are they just keeping the lights on, or should we be trying to innovate with what we currently have?
I think that leads to sort of part two of this point with, leading in a pandemic. And that part two is resiliency and capacity, right? Where I have thought as an IT leader in terms of, I need to keep my systems up. I need to create internet availability. I need to make sure I have network openness across all of my branches and to my clients. But I thought less about capacity, and not because I thought capacity wasn't important. It's that I tend to buy more capacity than I needed at any one period of time, right? I always had extra, and when I needed extra, I would, create that capacity for it. But now capacity and resiliency is far less about my data center, far less about what's available in my branch site, and far more about where that capacity now sits, which is federated in thousands of homes, right? So now I'm less concerned about my telco connection to my website, I'm still concerned, but I'm now concerned about the thousands of telco connections in my individual staff member to their site. What do I have to do? Or do they have enough bandwidth? Do they have unlimited bandwidth? Do I need to start paying for going from their small, short, and expensive environment to something cheaper for them? Do I have to give them a dual concern where they have both cable and satellite, right? Because they become far more important to me when I have an endpoint, right? So I have to shift my way from centralized to edge or to federated, sort of because of that.
And we've got a lot of companies right now that went from 100 concurrent VPN connections to 100,000 concurrent VPN connections.
Right.
Right. And that's not a light switch. It was turned on like a light switch, but it doesn't work like a light switch. It's not provisioned like a light switch. Right. And we went from, my concern with my data center is, how do I bring my my controlled connections, right? My branch connections, my private network bandwidth back to my data center and ensure that all of the business transactions happen. And I'm less concerned about my data center to the internet connection, right? But now that's shifted. The private connections that I'm paying for are effectively completely and utterly empty.
Right.
And everything comes in now through my VPN concentrators. And so what I'm seeing is abject panic, right? People spinning up services that weren't necessary before. They weren't mission critical before. Slack wasn't necessarily mission critical before. Zoom wasn't necessarily mission critical before, right? Things that we didn't look at the same way, now we really have to focus on. How does Zoom handle 12 people? How does Teams handle 25 people? What is the best platform to deliver information to 150, 300, 500, 700, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people at a time? Right. These were not questions you had to actually answer before, right? And now everyone must answer these.
And it's something that we have had the capabilities to do it. But what we're seeing is that because it was not mission critical, it was not thought about how to do it all the time. If there was a town hall, or there was some type of big meeting that happened once or twice a month, or even a quarter, then you go outside to look for that. But it looked like we now need to be looking to bring those skills in-house, because that could become the norm.
Well, I think it's more than that too, right? If we did a big town hall, what would we do? We'd go, hey, this office is doing the town hall in this room. This office is doing the town hall in this room, right? We'd consolidate together, and we were asked to consolidate together, and we'd ask people to consolidate together to bring that number down. That's no longer an option, right? Even if you could gather in groups of 3, I don't know about your state, my state's on a lockdown. I'm not allowed to gather in groups of 3, or I'm strongly discouraged from gathering in groups of 3. And to be honest, I don't really want to gather in groups of 3. So now we're really faced with something that's totally different.
And that impacts small things like provisioning, where you had a small IT team. You asked for a laptop, you asked for a mobile phone, they provision it for you, they walk to your desk, they give you the phone, they give you a little training. Well, that can't occur like that anymore, right? Provisioning now is all the way to the house, and therefore you can't do it centrally. You've got to think about somebody else doing the provisioning. Do I need to go to Best Buy and have them do the provisioning of my laptops and phones for me, right? It's a very different subset of how you'd operate even your edge devices.
You mentioned something that I seen some companies take advantage long time ago. That was that instead of doing a centralized purchase or a standard for an equipment, they created a standard set of tools so you can then leverage any equipment that you wanted. I saw that at Microsoft a long time ago. And it was very interesting, because you could go, like you said, you could go to Best Buy, pick up a laptop, and normally you will have to wait for your traditional IT organization to provision and get everything connected. But Microsoft say, hey, I don't have a need for that. And they just plug you into Azure Active Directory, and you were up and running. And all your apps that you needed were provisioned for you.
Yeah, we've got to think about being able to order a Hitachi phone and laptop from Best Buy and then going to pick it up or have them delivered to you like that. It's got to be that smooth of a process, especially since a good portion of the people that are now at home have never been at home, right? So they've probably never had a laptop before from work, and therefore the images that we need to put on them need to be far more standardized because they're task workers, not information workers. Well, this concept now needs to be prepackaged far easier and far used to the consumer experience than what it has been in the past.
So one of my favorite technologies as a CIO has always been, for decades anyways, I guess not always, but at least since about 2006, has been Citrix. And today, you should probably be running Citrix or something similar.
Right.
An aggregated RDP that allows you to publish apps that your users can log in and get the apps that they use pushed to them on whatever device they happen to be on. Because trying to provision, 1,000 new laptops with a corporate image that has the applications that's pushed out, or get the infrastructure to do that, traditionally is impossible right now.
And that's very interesting. I actually had a meeting with them yesterday because I had some people close to me that asked me about that. Even though they were a small shop, they cannot go to their office. And
Sure.
They were looking for a way how they can get their apps so they can work it from home. So if you're a big shop, they actually, there's technology. And I think that the whole message is we need to start thinking differently. We need to think not so much into the standardization, into that I have the control, and how do I provision the standard across the board without thinking that had to be only one way. Like you mentioned Citrix. Well, Microsoft has an option, but how do I do it simply across all of them? How do I provide the apps that are needed for whatever they need to do?
Well, and I think that's kind of, I mean, I think we should get out of the hardware business, not to put too fine a point on it, but stop thinking about these things as being hardware dependent. And we've done a really good job about that in the data center, right? We virtualized everything as much as we can, right? And we think about every new thing that gets brought online has less and less and less attachment to any kind of physical hardware, right? It's virtual, it's container, it's serverless, right? We're shooting for the smaller and smaller and smaller kind of data center attachment, whether that's on-prem or public cloud, but we don't do that for endpoints. And I almost think we should have done it the other way around, right? We should have really thought about the endpoints. I did this years ago. These are the 6 or 7 machines you could have. Pick one. They were purchased from something that had a local source. So if it was an Apple, it was bought from Apple, not a third party.
Right.
And it was bought with AppleCare. If you had problems, you could not call the help desk. You carried it into Apple.
Right.
Right. Because it just doesn't make sense to continue to push this kind of hardware focus when it comes to the endpoint. Right. I don't care about your keyboard and mouse. Throw it away and buy another one and expense it to your cost center. Then I don't have to deal with the cost center either. And it really, like, the load that relieved from IT and the amount of personalization that allowed the business unit to have was great. And all I had to care about was, is the standard app something that's easy to push, or is the standard app something I can make available through Citrix?
Mm-hmm.
And then I just do that. And it kind of, like, it loosened the amount of IT overhead needed by an incredible amount. And we're going to get into it a little bit more later, but it also somewhat simplifies security. I say somewhat because there's always, cautions to go along with that.
That is the perfect segue to topic number 3. So let's talk cybersecurity, because clearly it is a fundamental problem ongoing in IT. It's not going away, and I would in fact argue that the pandemic is in fact going to make it worse. And what's going to make it worse is that I now have additional dimensions to be considering about, and that this is an opportunity for bad guys to break in your house when you're away. Right? This is an opportunity for bored people at home who have the technical means to try their best to break into your business. Right? So you cannot take your eye off the ball in the traditional cybersecurity concerns. However, in addition, you now have thousands of new endpoints with thousands of new potential viruses and thousands of potential new users who are not used to the security protocols, thousands of new users that are not paying attention to what buttons they click and what emails they open and what documents they open, right? These things will have an impact to your systems. And now I have to consider this instead of 10 branches, 10,000 branches. So what does that mean to me from a cybersecurity perspective? Well, what would have been the first thing for you, Howard? What knowing this happened?
I would not have enabled VPN.
Mm.
I mean, the first thing I would have done was expand my RDP, my remote desktop workload,
Right.
significantly. I probably would have put it in Azure and done, or AWS, right, a public cloud, and I would have provisioned that way. Like Citrix now supports that, and Microsoft has supported it for a while. I actually think in Azure, the official Microsoft recommended methodology is in fact a Citrix deployment, because of exactly what you said, right? I have to know that instead of having 60 entry points, I now have the number of employees plus 60, whatever I had before plus the number of employees, right? Those are my new entry points, right? If a laptop gets compromised, if a keylogger is installed on one of those laptops, how damaging will that be to my environment?
Right.
Like that has to be the outlook. Forget about a virus. Data gets deleted from the laptop. Like that should be a lesser concern.
Right.
But really, a keylogger should be a big concern. And then secondarily, a DDoS was something that sucked, right? A dynamic denial of service attack or distributed denial of service attack. But that's because, okay, they screw with the internet connection at the data center.
Right.
But at least my private connections still work. Now it's the opposite, right? A DDoS on my VPN concentrator IP is a massive problem.
Right.
So how do I mitigate that? What is the alternative when VPN doesn't work? Right. And that would be those would be the very first things that I looked at, followed up immediately by social engineering is going to spike if this lasts more than a month. Right. Somebody knocks on your door and says, "Hey, I'm from your IT department." Like they know where you work from a little bit of research on Facebook and other social media and LinkedIn, right? Then they knock on your door and say, "Hey, corporate's asked me to come by and install the new patches. You had trouble with it last time." Even if you go, I didn't have trouble with it last time. I just do what corporate tells me to do. Like, okay, but I don't recognize you. Right. Do you honestly think corporate had enough people? I'm a contractor. This is my contract agency.
Exactly.
Right. And before long, you let them in, you log in, they plug a USB stick in, and that box is compromised. Right. Social engineering 101. Or, hey, I'm standing outside the branch. I've got to get in and turn things off or turn things on or turn things up or provision or do whatever. You need to come down and meet me, right? Social distancing, you're not even going to get within 10 feet of that person. You're probably not going to question them too hard. Right. If you do, great. But the concern is when you don't, right? The concern is never when things work. It's when things don't work. So social engineering, I think, is going to be a huge challenge and something that we're going to really have to figure out. That
and trusted sources. Like if I'm managing an attack from a foreign country halfway around the world, I know what to do in that event, right? I can look at firewalls and say, I'm not going to accept transactions from this particular source. But if all of those transactions and all of that attack is coming from your 100,000 existing users and employees now attacking you, well, that's something I'm not used to, right? That's not something I would have been prepared for.
Yep.
Which means, and I use this all the time, patching. As CIOs, we're very poor and we lack focus on ensuring that our equipment is patched, that our endpoints are patched, that our mobile and laptops are patched. This will be incredibly and fundamentally important for us to pay attention to.
Well, then we've owned the endpoints, and I would say the endpoints are the last things we patch.
Right.
We look at the data center and we go, this must be patched. Patch Tuesday rolls around. We have a process, procedure. It all gets done. We have remediation steps that we take, right? We can force things to happen by the business, but 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, 100,000 endpoints, if we're within a 10% margin of error, right? Because we at least control them. They're within our space, and we're monitoring those connections, and we're looking for, we're able to look at the traffic and do all kinds of neat and interesting things that are now impossible.
That's right. Nobody worries about a desktop. They worry about laptops.
Right. And really, Crypto Locker, right?
Right.
Should have really taught us to do the opposite, because the entry point for that isn't generally your server. It's generally someone on a workstation encrypting a file share.
Right.
And I would say that would be another thing that one of the things that I stopped doing years ago was allowing map drives. Just flat out don't allow it. I don't care what you think it is. It's a UNC path. It's always a UNC path. It's a UNC path. And while that's quasi security through obscurity, the goal is you're never going to get to 100% secure, ever. The NSA is not 100% secure. No one's 100% secure, right? What you want to do is make the barrier of entry so hard that the attacker looks for a softer target, right? So aim for what makes you an easy target, and let's get rid of those things. Let's harden those things. Let's make those things particularly difficult.
So one thing that you mentioned that I was just thinking about is that we sometimes, as IT, focus on our own equipment, but we don't train our employees to look at what they have in the house. Because if your kid's laptop that they're playing a game, all of a sudden have access to your laptop or to your network, that could affect you too.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%, right? It is one attack surface. It's actually very similar to why we do social distancing, right? We do social distancing to lower our immune system's attack surface.
Right.
That's literally why we do it. And maybe we should start thinking about some of the same things in IT. How do I enable social distancing between my corporate data and my corporate assets from all of the things that want to touch it?
That's a good topic. Social distancing for IT devices.
The good news is most of IT is good at it. Like, we're a whole bunch of introverts. So for me, this has been a party. Like, I don't have to talk to anybody. I don't have to see anybody. This is amazing. How do I do this all the time?
Two more things I think that we need to address with cybersecurity. So the first one I think is a shift but to be less focused on sort of backups and archiving and more on operational recovery. Because I think we're going to make far more mistakes than we used to in the past. And those mistakes need to be recovered far quicker than they used to before. I can't wait for the night before. I made a mistake now, fix the mistake now. So we got to think what that means technologically. And then the second part is more organizational, where I'm used to having my own security team, probably the ones that are looking for the events and managing the events. But I should also think about outsourcing that too, maybe as a secondary feature, where I have a secondary security SOC that's looking 724, that's thinking about and has expertise in hundreds of thousands of endpoints instead of managing data centers, to where my expertise is. This is your opportunity to think about sort of dividing and conquer capability.
So are you saying that we need to raise our hand and say that we need help?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think raising our hand and saying we need help should be the universal symbol moving forward.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, what this should have taught us is there are things we do well and things we don't do well. And we should concentrate not on being the jack of all trades and master of none, but mastering those things that are really core to our business, and then looking for partners that can help us fill in those gaps and really take over mastery of those things, right? Personally, I don't ever want to manage my own data center again. I want to outsource it to someone that really, truly understands how to keep power and cooling running to the absolute maximum level of efficiency and accessibility in a facility that is purpose-built and hardened, that has more connectivity to the world than I could ever even hope to document, much less manage. And I should really kind of think about other things that way. It doesn't mean I give up control or I give up responsibility. It means I look for someone to help hold a hand, right? Kind of to your point, I'm not looking to outsource all of my security, but I'm looking to augment my security with people that are better at dedicated pieces of that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So fourth corner of this square, digital transformation. Now, arguably a much more difficult conversation, right? Not because it's outside of IT, because it's really about all the projects I probably are putting on hold because the business is closed, right? Or it's not performing as well as it should. So of those, 60% of what I do in IT, those projects, which are innovation focused, that are focused on building new revenue or a different client experience or creating a different level of operational efficiency, how do I now re-articulate those projects or even create a new set of projects because of that? And now it's very industry specific, right? So when I look at retail other than grocery stores and pharmacies are closed, right? You're not there. Those, in fact, they've furloughed all of those sales employees, right? So now it's less about
Furloughed. You're definitely Canadian, sir. We just fire them here.
Oh, fair enough.
In reality, there's a lot more open than just those, but it is a
Right.
truly different experience.
Sure, but and a lot of what I hear is now the reality is those products are still required, right? It's not like the need for the products are going away. Maybe a percentage of them, but let's say the vast majority of that product still exists, need to be purchased, and therefore the shift from going in store to going online or using the mobile app exists. However, a good portion, especially the mom and pop retail chains, simply don't have the infrastructure to support transactions that are going through that world. So now I'm underperforming in my mobile and online experience. In fact, my online experience might have just shown the products and not actually able to commerce on the products, right? Versus a bank, as an example, that already do most of their transactions online and mobile. Yes, you can go into a branch. That is not where most of the transactions occur. Therefore, they're still effectively operating regardless, and most of the banks are still open, but they're still effectively operating even if the banks were closed. They're focused much more on how do I ensure that I can create the sense of community. In other words, how can I ensure the bank can be the conduit to the marketplace, to the bakery, to have the muffins that need to get to my house? And knowing, especially in Canada, it's not as true in the US, but especially in Canada, where our population is significantly smaller than the US and spread out significantly more than the US, that there are locations in Canada to which there is no delivery, right? Pickup in an hour isn't reasonable, right? So we've got to think about different ways of getting these products to the end point when your closest Starbucks is an hour away.
I don't know that my concern in a pandemic is how do I get my Starbucks, and I realize I'm probably in the minority based on how Starbucks stock tends to operate.
I use let's say loaf of bread then. So let me give you an example. My closest grocery store is a round trip 30-minute drive.
I don't know that that's uncommon for the U.S. necessarily either. Like mine is a solid. It's at least 15 minutes by car round trip.
Right.
But they don't have anything.
Right.
Right. And if I wanted to do an online order with a store pickup, I can't. All the slots for all the grocery stores around me are full. And I don't mean full today. I mean full for the next 10 days. For the duration of the calendar window they have open, they have zero availability. Right? The failure to be able to, and it's not really it's not their fault. I don't have another solution for them, right? Based on the way things are now, I'm not angry at them, but it is a frustrating situation because it was an underutilized service before this pandemic. Now it is an exceptionally overutilized service. And just in general, like we have no preparedness to deal with an alternative delivery method or experience would be the better way to put it. Right. I like to start digital transformation conversations with the definition of digital transformation, right? It's to change your business to deliver your products in the way your customers wish they could receive them. Mm-hmm. And this is a really, really, really good time to look at how are people shopping today and know that the things that are overburdened, you should probably think about expanding. And how do I improve the experience that is today? Because in reality, I'm going to use Best Buy as an example because I went there 2.5 hours ago, trying to get prepared actually for this because I wanted to get a new mic. I got my camera set up. I have a little bit different workspace that I needed to get some pieces and parts for. My laptop only has 2 USB as an example. The experience is you cannot go to the store. There is no in-store experience. You go to the website, you pick products that are in stock, you complete your order, they send you an email saying your order is ready for pickup, you pull into a lane, and someone comes out and greets you and says, "Hey, what's your name and why are you here?" Mm-hmm. They're very polite. I wouldn't be. There's no way that I would do that and be successful at it. But then they go in the store, they find your thing, they come out, they check your ID, they hand you the thing that you ordered. It's actually kind of a fantastic experience, if I'm being honest. And I would prefer to do that 100% of the time.
And that's the irony. The irony is that there's an assumption that once the pandemic is completed, everybody goes back to the way they used to do business, when in fact, this might in fact be the new norm.
I was going to say that.
You can't take something away that people like. They're
Right.
going to like this process, and therefore your business has now changed fundamentally.
And I think the question is, should your business change?
Right.
Right? Like, should your desire be to support this new model going forward? Is this now your new and? It's not an or. Is this now your new and? What are the lessons? That's why I said I think an ongoing lessons learned, right? Not an after action report, but a live action report is really, really critical for the whole business, right? What did we learn today? Because I promise you, you've learned something today. And the business needs to do the same thing. What did we learn today? Well, we learned sales are down 73% when I can't get stock to the store because they order from Amazon. I don't care what the retailer is, but that's kind of the default. Can I get it can I get it today? If the answer is no, then I'll probably look to Amazon. That tends to be kind of like, that's why they're a $1 trillion company.
Right.
Right. And so then it needs to become, okay, so how do I change things so that I'm able to deliver that experience today? Interestingly enough, I cannot get a monitor. I have one store I can show. I only have a Best Buy in my town. And they're all sold out of monitors, gaming consoles, the things that people all of a sudden need when they're at home all the time.
I can't get a video camera as an example.
Right.
Oh,
right. Yeah. There are no webcams. There's no speakerphones. Like, those things are completely gone. And I want to say it's more than a week until they refresh it. That's true for Staples and Office Depot as well.
So then the question will come, all this that it looked to be a new change, you just mentioned Amazon. Amazon grew so much because they listened to what their customer were asking. There was, can you deliver the product that I want in the way that I want it, in the time that I need it or that I want it?
But it's more than that, right? Amazon's all about the wish. They're not about, how do I do it the way I did yesterday? How do I do it? How do I deliver to you the way you expect? How do I change your expectations? Prime is a perfect example. Someone came up with the idea, an Amazon person came up with the idea for Prime in a brainstorming meeting and said, hey, I think this would be a good idea. Executives said, that sounds interesting, run with it and deliver it. And they had it up and running from idea to delivery in 90 days.
Wow.
Right? Amazon is not a retailer. It'd be silly to think of them that way. Amazon is a logistics company. They do logistics better than absolutely anyone else. And they do it by being extremely data focused and extremely agile. Amazon is very, very willing to say, I think this might be a wish. Let's give it a shot. And if it fails, it fails. No big deal. But if it succeeds, we've accomplished another wish, and we've transformed how the market looks and thinks about whatever the experience is to our benefit. They're very, very good at that.
Yep. Last mile business plans and business models will be a winning investment going forward.
100%. Like, if I was a restaurant today, I would be working on, what is my social media presence? How do I inform people of what's going on in my restaurant without having to come into the restaurant? And how do I get them the products in a way that's convenient for them?
Right.
So my friends, we have talked about 4 key areas that IT leaders think and different options that have helped our executives that are with us here today. And we want to invite you to this conversation. This is the team from the Sweet Spot, where IT executives share their ideas in how to really manage IT, with leadership and to help companies to move forward. So we have had Paul Lewis and Howard Holton. The topic today was how to manage IT on a pandemic, and the topic was spread into managing the capability, resiliency and capacity, cybersecurity, digital transformation. But we're not done. We want you to know that we're here to listen to you and to help you with whatever challenges you have within your IT and leadership. So reach out to us, leave us your comment on the different social media platform because we want to listen to you and we want to help you so you can succeed on IT. Any last words, my friends?
Thanks much. Stay safe. Watch some more Netflix.
Yeah, stay safe. And you know, I was asked in a podcast I did last week, what would your advice be right now? And my advice right now is educate. If you're a leader, give your people a Udemy or a Pluralsight or a masterclass or some other sort of LinkedIn learning subscription. If you're an individual contributor looking to spend some time that was freed up by meetings that never should have been meetings and should have been emails instead, take advantage of the time and learn something. Learn a language, learn how to program, learn how to cook, you know, read a piece of literature, educate in some way, take advantage of the time. You'll just be better for it. And please stay safe.
My friends, there you have it. We'll see you on our next episode. Bye.